Hello, I'm Paco Muñoz. Let me explain reception and sending of messages in the ZeroMQ library. The goals of this presentation are to correctly use the send and on operations in ZeroMQ when we use the Node.js programming environment, and to manage multi-segment messages in a correct and efficient way. The contents of this presentation are structured in these sections. Let's start. ZeroMQ provides different types of sockets: reg-rep, push-pull, pub-sub, and so on. All those sockets provide the same set of operations, mainly bind, connect, send, on, close, etc. This talk describes send and on-message operations in order to send and receive messages. So let's start with the message sending operations. To this end, we should use the send operation in order to send messages, as described in this example. In that example, we are using the SO socket and we request its send operation, passing a string as its argument. That string is the message to be sent to the other side, to the receiver. In this example, as already explained, the message has been a string. But messages may be structured, may be more complex. In that case, that structure may be given either using objects, and objects should be passed in JSON format because the contents of messages should be strings, and in this case we have defined a request object that has been declared using these curly braces and specifying that that object has two fields, type being a string, a value being a number. So in order to send this object, we should convert it into JSON format. To this end, we'll use the stringify operation from the JSON module. That JSON module is included by default in all Node.js programs. So here we have converted request into a string, and the resulting string has been passed as an argument to send. So that string is the contents of the message to be sent to the receiver. Instead of JSON format, we may specify multiple segments in order to structure a message. So in this second alternative, the segments are passed in an array, and that array is the single argument to the send operation. So in this other example, we have used the socket, its send operation, and as its single argument we have defined an array stated in brackets, and the slots in that array are strings that contain the values segment 1 for the first slot and segment 2 for the second slot. So this is the first segment and this is the second segment. Segments should be buffers or strings. A buffer is simply a sequence of bytes. Strings are converted to buffers using UTF-8 encoding. Non-strings are first converted into strings. In the end, we are transferring those buffers, simply sequences of bytes. In regard to message reception, they are received using message events on the socket. The arguments in the listener receive the message segments in the specified order. So here in this example, we are listening for message events, and to this end, the listener function identifies two formal parameters that correspond to the first segment and the second segment, respectively. So, in the body of this listener, we are trying to show those segments on the screen. To this end, we are passing the corresponding arguments as arguments to the console log operation. But be careful, because segments are simply binary sequence of bytes, and console log will show that sequence of bytes. Instead of this, if we want to show a string, we should convert that buffer into a string, and to this end we may use this operation or simply concatenate an empty string. If we don't know how many segments are in a message, we should deal with a variable number of segments in our listener. So, to this end, we may use the implicit arguments formal parameter that doesn't need to be specified in the list of formal parameters in that listener function. So, as stated, here we have a management for the message event, and we are using a listener without any formal parameter. In the body of that listener, we are using the default arguments. Arguments is a pseudo array, so we may use a for loop, like in this example, in order to visit all the slots in that array. Perhaps in some cases we want to explicitly convert all those arguments into an array. To this end, we may use the arguments pseudo-array and the array from operation. And in that way, we are converting the received arguments into this array called segments in this example. These two lines will substitute these three other in the example shown before. The for each operation scans all the elements in an array and calls for each argument, for each existing slot, this function, passing the corresponding value in that component of the array. Let's conclude. Once this presentation is ended, the student should be able to correctly use the send and on message operations in ZeroMQ and to manage multi-segment messages in a correct and efficient way.